This old junky shed back here is where we started rehearsing as a band. My dad's office is in the other half of it, or used to be. I would work all day long in the other half, and then I would go out into the shed and wait for the guys to show up, and we'd have a rehearsal at 6 or whatever. This is where the majority of the songs for Don't Turn Away were written, and Over It. I met Matt, I guess, when I was about 15. But when I went to his house, you know, like here's Matt with this Fender P bass and like really long, almost waist-length hair, and he's like jamming to Iron Maiden records in his bedroom. And I was like, all right, this is pretty cool.
Me and Trevor, we've known each other since high school, you know, and we used to be in a metal band, and we were just talking, and it kind of came up like, you know, playing metal just isn't really that fun anymore. We're like listening to it, and it's great and all, but there's a whole other world out there we should really consider.
You know, Iron Maiden songs were about like the flight of Icarus and pyramids and the mummy's tomb and pirate ships and stuff like that. And there's no reality in any of that. And
what had happened was the metal band we were in, Trevor quit. He got tired of doing it anyways. And then he called me one day and said, hey, me and you should get together and start jamming again. So, all right. And that's kind of when that started.
A friend of mine turned me on to Bad Religion and the Descendants and stuff, and I was like, well, if this is punk rock, this is really cool.
And all of a sudden this song just came around, and it was, you know, we're like, that's pretty rad, because we're not totally abandoning, you know, faster beats and distorted guitar. It wasn't fully punk rock like what we were always told it should be.
Punk rock was real. It was singing about everyday life and frustrations with the world and your environment.
At that point, as far as names go, it was Trevor, me, and Rob Kurth.
I had always been a drummer, you know, so I had drum set, spent a lot of time at the local music store, as we all do as musicians, and, you know, just hanging with the guys, and met Trevor and Matt at the local music store.
I know Matt and I both kind of looked at Rob like, well, you don't really get punk rock the way that we do, but that's cool.
The only bands I'd ever played in were a couple bar bands. You know, just jamming fun with the friends in the garage.
Rob was kind of like, I like these guys, I like the music, I'm in, you know. My version of punk rock doesn't have to be the same as yours, and blah, blah, blah.
We did a number of shows together, and we realized that the punk rock audience totally accepted us. They were like, wow, this is kind of different than anything we've been listening to. They know how to tune their instruments. They seem to care about what they're doing, and we did.
We were really self-motivated as a band. You know, we wanted to try and, if people weren't going to do it for us, we were going to do it. I was doing all the booking for the band, basically, and trying to get us out as much as possible to play shows. And our goal was like, let's play every weekend somewhere.
Starting out in the early days, we really had to give a lot of blood. I mean, any band would.
Oftentimes, the only shows I could get us were on weekdays. So, you know, we'd drive all the way down to Hollywood, or we'd drive to Orange County or Riverside or wherever we had to play a gig for no money, and then go back and get up at 6 and go to work the next day at a construction job. And we did that for several months.
So here I am constructing like these buildings and stuff. That's what I was doing. And then at night we'd go and play shows.
And you know, it was cool. We built a really cool scene in the Inland Empire in Orange County.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3,
I wanted to be able to play music full time. I wanted that to be my job. It was already my life, but I couldn't dedicate all of my time to it because I had to work a job too. I was trying to book us at the Scream in Pomona, and the night that I had booked, it was double booked with another package that was a record release party. It was Dr. Strange Records. I got the number from the promoter and said, hey, you know, we're double booked on this night. Why don't you just let us open? we're not looking to get paid or anything. We just want to play in front of people. And he's like, yeah, okay, cool.
So we knew that it was somebody that was accessible, and he sounded like a really cool guy.
And he goes, well, yeah, I'd like to hear demo, whatever. You know, I'm getting ready to put out this comp picture disc of all the bands that are on my label.
Because a lot of the bands we'd played with, a lot of the bands we liked, those kind of bands were on the, you know, real small indie labels like Dr. Strange.
The minute our set was over, I remember they both ran up to the stage and they're like, we're not only putting you on our comp, we want to do a full-length release with you guys. It was amazing. I mean, we were blown away.
We didn't know, like, signing to a small label like this, we didn't understand the music industry at all. We didn't know anything. Like I said, being from up here, there was nothing.
Bill was like, we're going to go to this cool studio. It's called West Beach. You know, Brett from Bad Religion owns it. And this guy, Don Cameron. And it was our first recording experience as face-to-face ever. We recorded Don't Turn Away in 2 weekends, including mixing, 4 days. We did a 7-inch first. Bill put it out. And I remember within like the first month or two, he called me up and he's like, Trevor, people are freaking out for this record. I was like, really? He's like, yeah, man. Everyone I play it for is like, who is this band? I got a list of every college radio station I could put together in the country. And I personally, with Matt, we sat down and we did a giant mailing to like all the college stations of our 7-inch.
We wanted to get bigger. And that's, any band that tells you they don't want to do that is a liar.
Bill was running a mail order record business at the time. And he didn't have the kind of capital he needed to keep pressing the records for the demand that was starting to happen for these things.
We were getting a lot of letters saying, I can't find your record, I can't find your record. And it started to become like every letter we got, we can't find it anywhere.
Here we were working our asses off, playing shows, out of town, in town, playing as often as we could. And we didn't have records to sell.
If we put 10,000 out and they were instantly gone, and you got to wait 6 months to do, you know, another little batch, it's kind of defeating the purpose of trying to get your music out there.
More people want the record than he can put out. What are we gonna do?
A friend of Mike from NoFX, he's like, hey, Mike just started this record label called Fat Records. He'd probably be into you guys.
So we landed a show up in Salt Lake City.
We just did one show. We drove all the way out there for one show just to prove a point to them, to him, to say, look, we're really interested.
So Fat Mike approached Dr. Strange and basically kind of made an offer.
You know, Fat Records and Dr. Strange will be on the album.
Fat can put out as many as we need to put out, but we can still be Dr. Strange.
Went home and I sat down with Bill and Bill was like, no. No.
Bill didn't want that. He's like, no, I don't want to be a part of all that whole scene. That's not me.
I don't want you to leave. You're on this label, whatever.
You know, being 2 or 3 years into a punk band, we still don't really understand the politics of it and all that. We just want to get more people to know who we are, so more people can come to the shows.
And we argued about it for a long time, and finally he agreed to sell the record off, because I don't know what he realized, but finally he agreed to do it. Once we go out on the road with NoFX, all bets are off. Now we're a touring act. We've all made arrangements to take months off of work.
We're out with Lagwagon and we realized that they sounded amazing. I mean, Trevor was the one who actually came up with that.
You know, we're playing with this ferocious 5-piece band with 2 guitars, and I never thought of myself as a very good guitar player, and you know, I thought we could do better by having a second guitar on.
I was kind of like, you know, to be honest, I didn't like the fact that there was going to be another person in the band. I kind of liked the fact that we were just this tight-knit thing, and it was cool.
I liked what we had, I liked what we did, and I didn't want to have some strange guy coming into our family.
I was playing in bands pretty much my whole life up until that point, and yeah, I mean, that's totally what I wanted to do, and this was it was a great opportunity for me.
And it just kind of happened. I mean, Chad was there, and I was like, pick up a guitar, you know the songs, because he'd been listening to the record.
You know, and it was definitely super odd going in because they had been playing together forever.
He came to my house for a rehearsal, and it really did work. It really did work.
We started playing together, and it sounded great.
It did sound pretty cool. We're like, okay, I got guitars on both sides. That's kind of cool.
I just jumped in and kind of went for it. What else could I do?
The three of us talked about it and made the decision that it'd be cool if Chad joined the band.
Ended up, he was one of the funniest guys I've ever met in my life.
I loved Chad being in the band.
Chad had a personality that's completely different from any of the rest of us. He really made it a lot of fun. The touring was way more fun with Chad in the band.
We were recording with a producer, an engineer, I guess, named Geza X.
And we told Chad that Geza X had a glass eye.
And they were like, hey man, you know, he had some problems in Vietnam. Don't look in his left eye.
So here's Chad. He's never been in a recording studio before. He's got his guitar and his amp and stuff.
I'm trying to play the song and you know, I don't really know Geza that much, and he keeps coming out and going, you know what, man, it's gonna be cool. You know, you can do this. And the whole time I was kind of like, you know, kind of like going like that, trying not to look in his left eye. And this thing went on through the entire session.
By this point, we were big. We were big enough in our little world. Like, bands that were playing pop punk music were starting to get bigger. The movement was starting to get bigger and bigger. Right before Don't Turn Away came out, I called up EZAT and I was like, I want to do a record release show and I want you to let me put all the bands on it. And it was this day-long event at Spanky's. It was just amazing. Rather than getting paid for the show, which we sold out in advance, he gave us a trophy. We got a trophy for selling out Spanky's.
Trevor was like, you know, we still need to go farther than this. I thought we were doing pretty good on Fat. I didn't really know what was wrong with it.
Fat's small enough that Mike's not really offering a very large advance. And
All it was a one record deal, and that record was already out.
I'm like, I need to get money so that I can put some in the bank and say, now I can go tour and I know my bills are covered, because we're not going to make any money on tour. We're going to be making $50 a night, whatever we can sell on merch. So, you know, it's a crossroads everybody has to face when they have a band.
At that point, you know, Trevor and Rob kind of decide, yeah, a major might be the best thing for us.
Through our friend Jim Goodwin, who recorded our first record, we got a manager.
Desi Benjamin was our first manager, and I couldn't fucking stand him at first. You know, I thought he was the biggest, weirdest freak I've ever met in my life.
I just knew we needed help getting a proper record deal, and I was out of resources. I couldn't do it on my own.
After time spent with Desi, I came to love him quite a lot. You know, he was a good guy, and he was looking out for us. He was a little dicey and shady at times, but I think that that's good for a manager.
Got a couple of labels interested in the band that were offering some real money and tour support and stuff like that. And we settled on this label called Victory Music, which is owned by JVC in Japan.
So we did it, and it really, I really didn't like any of it. I didn't like any part of it.
In my perception, the way I recall, is that we all wanted to go there and we all wanted to do it. And that was going to be the best thing for us, you know, career-wise.
They kicked us down with an advance, which was cool. You know, I'm not going to deny that. And, hey, cool, you know. I was able to put a roof on my father's house. You know, that was really cool for me.
You know, looking back, maybe Matt thinks that we should have stayed on Fat and we should have stayed punk rock and, you know, all that stuff. But, you know, I think we made the right choice as a band.
It helped us make the band bigger than we could have ever done on our own. We recorded the Big Choice record, which was done in a blur. It was done in like 10 days. I had to do vocals sick, so my voice sounds crazy on the record. We just rushed through the whole thing, and while the label was paying top dollar and sending us the bill. In trying to make it punk rock, whatever that means, we were trying to make it not sound slick, and that ended up making it not sound very good. But we made the record, and I think there's some great songs on it. We got some good performances, and that's all that counts. While we're on tour with the Boss Tones, our manager's on tour with us, Desi. And one of the guys from the Boss Tones pulls me aside and he goes, "Look, dude, I know you haven't been doing this for very long, but here's a tip. Your manager shouldn't be on tour with you the week before your album's coming out. You should be making sure the record label's promoting it. If he's out on tour with you, how can he be being a manager? That's a road manager's job." And at the time, we're like, "Oh, really? Oh, okay." And that was kind of our first insight to the fact that we needed a manager that really knew more what they were doing and had more experience.
I had become familiar with them through Don't Turn Away, but really the Punk USA comp that they put out.
Rich, at the time, was working for Borman and Moyer.
My boss buzzes me and asks me if I've ever heard of Face to Face. And I say, yeah, thinking it as my opportunity to actually work on something, instead of just rearranging the papers on my desk every 5 minutes.
And Rich was kind of green and learning his way through, but he had his own record label, Vagrant, that he was running out of his apartment at the time.
My favorite band comes up for management, and I get to be their day-to-day manager. I mean, it was like, I felt like I won the lottery.
He was really excited and like super dedicated to, you know, making it happen, and really was into our band.
There was a lot of messes to clean up, and the band was getting successful in spite of themselves.
We played a show in Hollywood one night and came out, and on one of the K-Rock Sunday night shows, our song was playing.
A&M, the marketing company at the time, got disconnected to radio.
But it wasn't off the record, so they had to re-record it to put it on the record.
So we go from like having an indie record out on Fat Records to being a national touring act to coming home from tour, and now we've got a song on the radio. I mean, it was like, I couldn't even comprehend it.
As far as, you know, the industry was concerned, they came from nowhere. Well, they came from Victorville, which was pretty much nowhere. And all of a sudden, they were all over K-Rock.
And I still lived up here. So I couldn't even hear my song on the radio in the desert because it didn't come up here. We'd be driving home from the studio listening to K-Rock, and Disconnected would come on the way home. And we'd be like, "Oh my God, you know, can you believe this?"
Big Choice was our major label debut, and that was going to be the record that, you know, put us on the map. And so I thought.
Big Choice was the album that we got all the backlash.
Yeah, there was a certain amount of people and fans, kids that would say, "Oh, you're getting popular, you know, oh gosh, you're shooting an MTV video, you are a sellout."
They'd come on stage and people would throw change at them. I mean, just hurling money at the stage constantly.
It didn't matter what we did. We were just this band that played shows. We got on Dr. Strange, and there were like a couple kids that were like, "Oh, what, are you gonna put out CDs now? Oh my God," you know. And then we went to Fat Records. "Oh my God, you sold out, you know, to Fat Records." What? What does that mean? We're like, "No, we just want to put records out."
You know, everybody was kind of like, you know, you guys gotta stay punk rock. You gotta blah blah blah. You know, you're this, you're that. But I don't buy into that crap.
They're the only band to leave Fat Records to go to a major label. So they took a world of shit for that.
Now that we're on Victory Records, we're like, okay, let's go out and tour. So we call up NoFX, hey, let's get on a tour. Mike's like, oh, okay, well, now that you guys aren't on Fat anymore and you're on JVC, we'll let you on the tour. We want some new TV sets, though. So the label actually said, okay, yeah, we'll do that. And they let everyone in NoFX like pick out a new TV set and charged it to us.
They had a terrible record label. It was called Victory Music, which just shows how clueless they were. I mean, Victory Records have been around for a good 6 or 7 years by the time Victory Music came along and just appropriated the name.
I had it set in my mind that we get on a major label, all of our problems will be solved. Boy, was I wrong. Not only did we not get on a major, we ended up signing to a label that was the worst kind of all labels, which is a mid-level label. A label that acts like a major, but doesn't have the muscle or the money to back it up.
I recall a night driving from South Dakota to like Minneapolis or something, and Matt was up with me, and I was helping him do the drive, and he was totally anarchy and didn't want to be there, and you know, all that stuff.
I want to say it was always a lot of fun, but of course it wasn't. I mean, there was so much going on.
He had trouble with the fact that I was making decisions and kind of at the helm, but I always had been.
Everything sucked to Matt. Nothing was ever good enough, nothing was ever punk rock enough. And some days, you know, they weren't making enough money, and other days they were making too much money.
I think that's kind of when things started getting rough, you know? It was just kind of like, I started having completely different views than them. You know, they had their way and I had mine.
To the point where Matt, at one of the shows in Japan, was like making derogatory statements about me on stage on the microphone. And the night that happened, I was just like, you know what, that's it, we can't do it anymore.
Me and Trevor went out late one night and got some noodles and strolled through town, and we kind of started talking about what was gonna go down and how that maybe we wanted to, you know, deal with the situation with Matt.
All the bad feelings and everything are starting to manifest now in a really unhealthy way that's becoming public, because now it's part of the band's persona with the audience.
I've been managing the band less than 6 months, and Trevor basically goes, I can't do this anymore with the lineup the way it is, you know, which just kind of sent my whole world crashing down around me.
And about a week later, they had called me and said, hey, let's get together and map out a little plan for the future here. And they're like, well, we can totally tell that you're not happy with what we're doing and the way we are and who we are and all that stuff.
At first, Matt was really shocked and upset. Like, what are you guys trying to say? I mean, he founded the band with me. I mean,
I didn't want to be out of the band. I didn't want to leave the band. And so I totally said, well, whatever you guys want to do, you know, that's cool. I'll be a part of it and whatever.
I mean, he had been friends with Trevor for, you know, God knows how many years, a lifetime. And so they had brought their own baggage into this thing before we ever got anywhere.
And I was just kind of like, oh my God, this is like the weirdest day of my life. I already knew there was tension. I thought we'd get together and talk about it. We could figure it out.
Kids start bands for pretty idealistic reasons, and they think they're going to be together forever. And then you realize the similarities that you had when you were hanging out in your garage aren't necessarily going to translate to the road.
And Chad called me a couple weeks later, and he goes, Chad called me, which is kind of weird, because to me at that point. He was still the new guy. And he's all, so we're going to get together in practice, and if you want to come down and jam, that's cool, and if not, that's cool too. And I go, yeah, I guess not. That was it.
But, you know, we were younger back then. We might have been better off to talk it out, and maybe we could have worked it out, but it just happened the way that it happened.
I swore to God that I'd never play bass again. I knew for a fact. And I even had my stuff set in the corner. I was going to sell it, and that was it.
And to his credit, it shows what passion he has for playing music and you know, and songwriting and everything. He jumped almost immediately into another band. He got into Pulley, and then he got into No Use for a Name.
Looking back on it now, I'm so glad that I didn't stick around with it, you know, because that probably was, in my opinion, as far as my well-being, it was like the best career move I could have made, for sure.
Now we were a broken band. We had no bass player, so we had to figure out what we were going to do. It was time for us to write a new record, and it was time to find a bass player.
How the hell did we get Scott? I have no idea. Put an ad in the paper for a fucking clown, you know? I don't know.
I was working as a shipping receiving clerk at a electronics firm here in Los Angeles. I was drinking and smoking and pills and whatever I could. I was into self-punishment at that point.
He drove out here and showed up at Chad's grandma's house. We had him learn Disconnected, and about halfway through the song, I just turned around to the other two guys and I'm like, this is the guy.
Before he even got home, Trevor had called me. He's like, that's the guy. The guy's a complete whack job, but he's the guy.
I mean, I knew like in half a song.
Little did we know that he was a total, you know, total Fruit Loop. He was exactly what we needed at that point, I think.
A little bit of a character, but but that's what's great about Scott.
I was a total goof when I first met him. They tried, you know, the first day we got together and jammed, they started kind of reading me the band riot act, like the do's and don'ts of Face to Face.
And he picked up a guitar stand and put his chin on it and started going and making this sound like he was flying around the room in a spaceship during my talk with him. And I was kind of like, okay.
But, you know, they had their fun with me. Like, they had a friend of theirs pretend to be Matt.
Our friend busted into the rehearsal room and went, hey, what's up? And then we were all like, oh, hey, dude, what's up, Matt? And we were like all freaked out.
But I didn't know it wasn't Matt. They knew I didn't really know what he looked like all that well or whatever.
And Scott was just all bummed, like, oh my God, what's going on? And you know, he's all, oh, so you're trying to take my job in the band? That's cool. Whatever, dude.
I'm like wondering, is this dude gonna kick my ass?
I thought Scott was gonna have a heart attack, right? He's totally sweating and freaking out. And then we're like, nah, just kidding. This is our friend Eric. Whatever.
You know, Trevor and I are you know, tofu and meat and potatoes. We're really socio-politically, not quite morally, we're really on opposite ends of the spectrum. So, you know, differences aside, differences can work together if people have a lot of common ground and respect and all that other stuff.
He's one of the best bass players I ever played with in a band. His musicianship, like, forced everyone to step it up a notch.
Scott's first show was like 2 weeks after he joined the band.
Rob had promoted a show that we were headlining. It was like a teen suicide prevention concert.
And Scott had to play in front of Matt's hometown, in front of 2,000 people. Trevor looks over halfway through the song and Scott's already singing background vocals. I mean, it was like meant to happen.
This is the time in the set when we're going to ask everybody to do something with us. You guys feel like doing something with the band? Okay. How about if we started out simple? Real simple. Just a light pogo. Everybody. Don't stop, don't stop. I don't know how to play, just go away. Now I know how to play, just go away.
I think at that point everybody was really happy. That was a good time.
There was enough of a stress level with Matt in the band that once we dealt with the problem, everybody felt a lot of relief in the group. It was like, whew, okay, cool. I mean, we had to make a third album, and that's a pivotal record for a lot of bands if you can even get that far.
Self-titled record was we locked ourselves in a really crappy studio in downtown Los Angeles, is like right by Skid Row.
Trevor wrote almost all that record. In fact, my contributions to it were minimal. I just added to songs that he had already started writing.
It's the point where I really got more into learning about recording and becoming interested in producing records and engineering. And
we had like 15 vintage guitars, like everything that you could possibly ever want as a guitar player, and amps, and it was just insane.
We decided to call it Face to Face because we felt like it was a defining record for the group. The song I Won't Lie Down leaked. I don't know how it happened, but K-Rock picked up on it like a month before the record came out.
Yeah, they had Sublime's What I Got and I Won't Lie Down on the same day, and they just started just playing the crap out of both songs. And MCA moved up the Sublime record to capitalize on it, and A&M went to K-Rock and asked them to stop playing I Won't Lie Down.
Because I guess the head of radio promotion called up and said, you need to hold off on playing the single rather than moving the record up.
Pretty much the dumbest thing I've ever seen. It's still the most demoralizing, deflating, ridiculous decision.
The songs dropped before the album even came out.
So that kind of killed any kind of momentum for that. And it sucked.
By the end of that record, we were a full-fledged headlining national act in the U.S. We were not opening for anyone. We were headlining our own tours and packing them in.
It was like the big time for me, I mean, there were records in stores and we'd go on tour and kids were there and it was great. This was everybody's pretty much dream as a kid, to be in a band and tour around the country. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that?
Boy, that was when we started playing bigger shows and we had a bigger tour bus. Every level we got to, whether it was a little bit of money or it was the first time we were on MTV or the radio, all these little levels were just steps for me. And all I wanted to do was get to that next step. That's all I cared, really, because if it all crumbled, if I died, if the band died, if everybody in the world hated us and we couldn't afford to tour anymore, I would have been pretty darn happy.
Rob is starting to develop an attitude that is really kind of strange to the rest of us, where he's sort of taking the success very literally, and it's kind of changing the way that he acts in interviews, just the way he handles himself around the band.
I know that Rob was kind of maybe not taking it so seriously.
It didn't really matter to him one way or the other. I mean, I think Rob would have been just as happy with a salary job, making the same money, doing something else.
And we always had problems with tempos with Rob. He'd start a song and oh my God, he'd click it off and then it would be like 10 times too fast.
His shortcomings as a drummer were starting to drag me down as a bass player, and for me it's always just really been about playing.
So I think we were in the middle of some tour or something, who knows what the circumstance was, but Rob was just fucking up all night. you know, Trevor was just getting pissed off, and we all were like turning around going, come on, guy, you know, get it together. And, you know, I think Trevor finally turned around and fucking spit at Rob.
If I pretended I was fine, struck it from my mind, would it still be there? What if I do anything to make it seem alright? It's alright, it's alright, it's alright, it's alright, it's alright.
We were in New York playing Tramps.
One of the crew members was on the bus trying to sleep, and you know, Rob was like trying to bring chicks on the bus or something, and I was like, and he was drinking and all that stuff, and I was like, hey man, you know, let the guy sleep on the bus and take this into the hotel room. And he like, you know, stepped up in my face and
Rob got all pissed off because Trevor wasn't fun.
said, you know what, you're a rock star, you never want to have any fun. And
I think the real opinions were kind of spilled out that night of each other.
that was kind of the turning point, because he like jumped up at me like to fight me, and he was drunk and I wasn't. And I remember I pushed him down on the hotel room bed really hard and just like was like, just back off, dude.
So I remember getting to the venue and them not speaking to, Rob not speaking to any of the members of the band, because it turned out the rest of the band kind of shared the same kind of feeling.
You know, Chad and Trevor and myself were at Rob's house, and we were really, you know, we had made up our mind, you're out, whatever.
And I remember we hemmed and hawed around for, I don't know, hours on end.
But Yara was late for something, he had to go, and he just threw his hands up in the air and said, oh, I don't have time for this shit. Rob, you're fired, I gotta leave. He just left.
I think we did one last show at the University in Riverside, and that was it. And I never talked to Trevor again. That was it.
It wasn't a pursuit of absolute control for Trevor, because that was never the deal. It was always trying to find someone that's equally as driven, committed, desirous of this thing.
It was time for us to sit down and figure out what kind of a record we were going to do next.
I had a lot of ideas, and that just matched right there with Trevor. And so, you know, we were perfect foils for each other.
We started writing songs that were really different, not really punk rock at all. At first we were a little bit, you know, sheepish about showing the songs to one another, but we did, and we kind of egged each other on. You know, I liked Scott's songs, he liked mine.
He didn't even want to play us Lost, and when he finally did, I was like, you know, lump in the throat. That's the most beautiful song, and all that stuff.
I mean, we were just kind of sick of the old face-to-face stuff. We toured it and played those songs so much, we were sick of them.
At that time, I was a staff engineer at a studio called The Complex. There was a film in production, a much anticipated sequel to a popular film called Mortal Kombat. Face to Face was tapped to submit a song for that thing, and of course it had to be in that remixed style of the 90s. We kind of bonded during that process and became friends, and then they were working on a live record, so I was the guy that they used to mix the live record.
After the live record, Trevor's like, that's a great cap for what our career, let's go out like this. I'm writing different songs, Scott's got a bunch of songs. It doesn't sound like Face to Face.
It was a weird time. I mean, we all felt like we had been pigeonholed and been what we were for so long. We wanted to make a conscious choice and actually come together as a whole and make a different record.
There was always like an uncomfortable feeling about being sized up by the people around us, be them, you know, the industry, our friends, fans, whomever. We always wanted to squiggle out from under the thumb of judgment or whatever, and what we were.
At this point now, it's me, Scott, Chad. The three of us are totally united on this new direction that we want to take, and we need a drummer.
Unlike Shiflet, who was kind of an immediate connection, we spent months looking for a new drummer. Kids would show up with a stack of stuff to get, I don't even know if they knew how to play drums, but they'd show up with a stack of stuff to get autographed. One poor kid showed up with his hair like freshly dyed to look all punk rock and halfway through the first song, it's like running down his face. The dye is turning his face green.
We searched a million dudes and finally found Pete Parada.
The receptionist at the rehearsal space turned out to be Pete.
And then I was the last dude, you know, and they'd go through all these guys, and then it was funny because I kind of felt like they're all like, great, now the kid that, you know, moves the cars in the parking lot wants to play with me. We're scraping bottom now.
He set up his drums and we set up our gear and we said, okay, here's a new song idea we've been working on. We don't want you to play Disconnected or I Won't Lie Down or anything like that. We want you to try this new song idea we have. And he nailed it, and we're like, all right, this guy's gonna be great for this new direction we want to take.
And then we stopped and Chad just looked at me and he was angry. And I was just like, and he says, what's wrong with you? We've known you for like 6 months. You sat here and listened to us audition like 60 people. You made us go through all that. Why?
It's always really weird bringing someone that you don't know at all into a band that had been together for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years at that point.
Trevor is maybe the most serious person I've ever met. He's got a voice like no one else. Like you hear his voice and you know that's Trevor, that's face to face. Scott is just the funniest dude ever. He's the most talented guy probably I've ever met or worked with. Like he'll grab some crazy instrument and just pick it up and be blazing on it. And you're like, Chad was great. He was funny because he just took me under his wing, you know, because I was just a little kid. I was like 23 or something, and I didn't know anything about anything, and I'm coming into this situation. But I felt bad because I always thought Chad's name was John because he had his guitar case said John Holmes on it. I remember they came in for rehearsal one time and Scott got there and Trevor hadn't come yet, but Chad had come and then went to get something to eat and he's like, oh, tell them I'll be right back. So Scott comes in, he's like, oh, is anybody else here? And I said, yeah, John said he'd be back. He went to Del Taco. And he just kind of looked at me and just, okay. And just, you know, never corrected me, never said anything.
What's up, bro? Hi. Yeah! Go kiss his daddy. There you go. Dude, how fucking perfect. Morrissey, go do it! You like that? Thanks for taping right on my skin. All right, Pete, anyway, dude, I'm gonna go get something to eat, bro. I'll catch you later, man, all right? See ya. Come on, ladies, kiss him.
We had our head in the clouds making Ignorance is Bliss. It was the longest we had ever gone up until then without touring. We weren't on a label. We were just a band in a rehearsal room.
It was great having that amount of time and freedom because we'd never had a recording experience like that before. We could try every weird idea we ever had. We had a guitar amp under a grand piano with all of the sustain hammers off, and we were like stabbing chords on the amp and letting it ring on the strings and the piano and recording all this weird ambient stuff.
And so I'm in there, I just learned all these punk rock songs and I'm ready to write, and then they're busting out these rock songs.
We spent a lot of money making that record, and we spent like 4 months in the studio.
We even all grew beards. It was our let's get fat and grow beards phase. You know, that whole like, you know.
You know, we probably got a little bit carried away, but I think every band has to do that at some point in their career, so they just know what it's like.
We were alienating everyone around us. Our A&R guy at A&M had said, I'm not hearing it, write me 5 more Disconnecteds, which made us angry as hell and drove us further into the eclectic field, kind of like the big fuck you.
They were looking to I guess, broaden their horizons and do something different, and they didn't want to stay limited to the same style and sound.
We had one day that was just awful, and everybody was just pissed, and Scott had a blowout, and everybody was upset. Trevor was mad. So the next day we come in, and everybody's just kind of like, how's this going to go today? So Scott, being Scott, Chad Blinman was producing, would pick up Scott because they live near each other and bring him to the studio. He gets to Scott's house, and he comes out head to toe in a clown suit. And he just comes out like nothing's wrong, no big deal. And he kept it on all day. And that was just like totally diffused the whole situation.
You know, I mean, being in the band and being on tour and making records, you live in a bubble. So it's hard to kind of gauge what's really going on outside of your little world.
You don't know a thing about me.
No more of this. We already got one.
There's something that you should know. 'Cause
There was a lot of concern and a lot of wringing of hands over how well this material was going to go over. I think the idea, or the hope anyway, was to satisfy the existing audience and also broaden that audience, and I don't think that happened.
You know, our fans just didn't get it initially. Nobody got it initially.
Oh yeah, people hated that record passionately. Everything about this band, everything about our audience was passionate.
At least half of the audience looked like this.
Like going like this.
I think we came up with this was the new logo for the band.
From members of the audience, which, while not polite, made a clear statement.
Guys were making like violin things and just going, "What is this?" Like mouthing it to us while we're playing.
So here's what I don't get. They paid money and bought the CD, didn't like it, so they spent more money to buy a ticket and come to the show and tell us they didn't like it.
It's basically like watching your kid get beat up, you know, in Little League. Game after game after game.
I had the perspective and the ability to kind of step back and go, now you know what it's like to be me, guys. Every time I read a bad review or whatever, it's like them saying they don't like me.
So in Denver, we're playing a show and it's Ignorance is Bliss, and there's like 3 guys in front of me just spitting on me the whole time.
So he finally has had it. Like there's loogies hanging off his headstock, and finally hit one in the face.
I threw my guitar over to our stage guy and jumped in feet first.
Like this. Feet first, into the crowd. Thankfully kicked the right dude in the face and just came up swinging.
It was pretty gnarly, man. I was in the middle of, 2,000 kids and everybody was swinging. It was brutal.
And it was just, I stopped playing and run to the front of the stage, and Trevor's looking at me like, what the fuck are you doing? And I'm like...
At that point I knew I was holding on a little too tight.
We were all snapping. It sucked.
The tour was hard.
It was a rough tour.
I think Chad took it the hardest. He busted his ass on that record. I mean, all those solos and stuff, he really outdid himself.
This was personal now because Ignorance is Bliss was really the first face-to-face record where everyone felt like they had a creative stake in it.
That was a bit of a tough pill to swallow because we felt we had made a masterpiece.
It was after that show, I was on my way home and, I was in the bus one night and it was totally late at night and it was just me. And I was really thinking about it, and I was like, you know what? I'm done. That's it.
That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Chad quit. He was out.
It was becoming hard to be on tour for, say 9 months out of the year. And, I have a 3-week-old son at home.
He had a lot of pressures from the home front to change his line of work and be home more often.
I think at that point, we just saw that it was like, God, this is such a fight. Why it shouldn't be this difficult.
And we pulled the plug. We're just like, that's it, cancel the rest of the tour. We made up some story. Chad broke his leg or something, I think, is the story we made up.
Public perception is real important regardless of what your music's all about and what you're doing. You can't escape it.
Because they had kind of mastered a certain sound and become known for a certain sound, people didn't want them to change.
As a musician and songwriter, I think it's probably the best record that I've ever been involved with, that I've ever recorded on. But some face-to-face fans would agree and some wouldn't.
Fuck you! Fuck you, Mom and Ron! Fuck you, Mom and Ron! Fuck you! Fuck you, Mom and Ron! Watch it, watch Scott. We're not cleaning up either! Fuck you!
So we cut the tour short and we regrouped and we sat down and we said, what in the hell are we going to do now? Because we've spent 7 or 8 years building this great career. We were at the top of our game, and then we took time off and made an art record and just freaked everything out.
I thought it was imperative that they get back on the proverbial horse.
Rich just said, you need to go make a punk rock record again. And I didn't want to hear that. I hated that idea. But the more I thought about it, I knew it was the right thing to do. So I convinced the band that's what we should do.
We had a pretty bad attitude going into that writing process.
The whole record was inspired and fueled by the experience we had with Ignorance is Bliss, as apparent in the title.
Chad at that point was involved in a pretty minimal way.
We called Chad and we're like, look, just come in and learn the songs, play in the studio so we have your recording, we'll pay you a flat fee and come and do the photo shoot. I felt really stupid putting out another record with another member change.
He agreed to play on the record and to create the illusion that we were still a four-piece.
And I did that record. I came down and I think Trevor, showed me the songs in a couple of hours and like, here you go, play this part.
But this record was like good all the way through. And we're like, wow, this is good. It's coming out, and it came out naturally, and it was easy. There was no fight to it. You didn't even have to think. And it was almost like the rebirth of the band again.
I think we got a lot of our fans back, and the irony was I think we also pissed people off again because people thought we went running from the Ignorance sound too quickly, because there was a certain faction that loved Ignorance, that thought it was the greatest artistic leap possible.
And it's funny because even when we were making Ignorance is Bliss, we were talking about how the next record was going to be raw and more visceral again. The typical pendulum swing. We didn't want to make, once again, the same record twice, and that meant not wanting to do Ignorance again.
However, I tried to quit. The guys, man, they made it so fucking hard for me. Rich was like, I couldn't go an hour of my life without him calling me, just badgering me, trying to get me to stay in the band, which I think is noble.
It was Rich's plan all along that at some point along the way we convinced Chad to do the touring.
And somehow I convinced him to do the Reactionary tour again, another tour.
He did the show with us in LA, and the next day we had a show in Phoenix, and he drove out there on his own 6 hours.
Picks up all his gear and drives back before our plane even lands so that there will be no discussion.
He was gone before we even got to Phoenix, before the band even made it there.
It was good and it was bad. It was bittersweet. I didn't want to leave, but I did. I mean, that was probably one of the biggest decisions I've ever made in my life. And when it actually came down to brass tacks, making that decision was the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
Because it's like, okay, I'm out there, I'm away from my cats. These guys are away from their fucking kids and their wives, and they're making it work,
I toyed with it in my head for, years after. Did I make the right decision? And, I think I did.
Right when I joined the band, Chad quit, like immediately. And I thought, well, does he hate me or something? I couldn't believe it. I thought, I won the lottery joining this band. Why does this guy not want to be in it? How could someone not want to be in this?
The first time I tried to quit the band was an attempt for me to quit so that I wouldn't have to fire Rob.
Scott tried to quit once, and Rich just told him no. Scott went over to Rich's office and just went in, and he's like, you know what, Rich? And Rich just goes, no, you're not fucking quitting. And Scott's just like, okay, and got up and left.
Rich was always the fourth or fifth member of the band, and I think he cared as much for it as anyone.
he was the one that would never let Face to Face die. He was the one, like, every time that we were like, yeah, we're done, he was like, no, you're not. You know, I booked another tour now, you know.
You know, I think every band is just one blowout away from breaking up.
Now we're a three-piece, and we have to be a three-piece because we've got a 40-date tour booked, and this is the second night, and there's no Chad.
We had no time to figure it out, so any idea of like postponing a tour or finding a second guitar player was just out. We had to just quickly trump up a set that we could pull off with just the three of us.
I'm trying to figure out on the fly before the show that night how I can integrate some of the notey parts with the chords and stuff like that. I was terrible at it. We haven't played as a three-piece since Don't Turn Away. All these songs were written with two guitar players and two guitar parts. We jumped up on stage that night and we did it, and to our surprise and to our joy, the crowd didn't seem to care.
When it just was down to Trevor, me, and Pete, it was a perfect triangulation. I could hear the guitar, drums, bass. We could really fly this thing now.
Does anybody see it? Another sound for the floor. Does anybody hear him? He's screaming out the same blade war in everyone. Can't be right, but everyone will decide. Not afraid of the price I pay. Won't lie down as you walk away. Not afraid of the price I pay. Won't lie down as you walk away.
You know, by the end of the reactionary touring cycle, we were a three-piece. It was normal for us at that point, and it felt good. So by the time we got off the road, all talk or consideration of finding another guitar player was over.
Now we were free agents to finally do a record deal with Vagrant, who by this time had grown into just a powerhouse of an indie label.
How to Ruin Everything, our last studio record, is my favorite face-to-face record.
The approach we took to the whole record, from the songwriting into making the record, was a very stripped down, organic approach, and it was awesome.
We went in and made How to Ruin Everything live, put all the guys in the same room together, no headphones, no studio isolation booths or anything.
Bass, drums, and guitar all at the same time in the same room. Somebody makes a mistake, you got to stop and start over again. We all knew it was our last record. Me and Scott knew it when we were writing songs for it.
They made a great record, and it seemed like a fitting way to wrap it up.
I thought it was a very poetic way to end our career. Our albums are bookended, you know, with a three-piece record, the start and finish.
It was really important to Trevor not to be one of those bands that kept going long past its expiration date.
Some bands can do it forever. I didn't feel like it was right for Face to Face.
Though I clearly recognized that our time had kind of come, I was having the most fun of all the years in the band.
Wow, this is going to take forever.
Putting the farewell tour together was no big deal. It wasn't emotional in any way to me. When it finally happened and I walked out onto stage for the first show, it hit me like a ton of bricks. in a way I could have never expected or imagined it was going to. And I almost felt like I had to stop the show and walk off stage. I've never experienced stage fright in my life. It's never been the kind of thing that's ever bothered me. I could get out in front of people no matter what. But it was such an overwhelming wave of emotions that came over me, realizing that this is the last time I'm ever going to sing these songs in this club to these people in this city, culminating in Los Angeles. We did 3 nights at House of Blues Anaheim and 3 nights at House of Blues LA, which were sold out in advance, weeks in advance. I invited everyone down to the show. I expected Matt and Rob to come, but Matt was stuck in New York and couldn't make it. And Rob didn't want to come because Matt wasn't going to come, so it would have been weird to not have the original lineup. The one guy that I never expected in a million years would show up was the guy who did.
And he walked in, didn't look a day older, and it was like nothing ever changed.
He comes in with his wife, and he's like, yeah, we were just having dinner across the street, and I figured I'd stop in and say hi. You know, his whole thing was, oh, I'm just here to watch. And we immediately put a guitar in his hand. We're like, you're playing guitar, dude. Forget it. You're coming on stage and playing with us.
Check this shit out! You guys might remember Chad Yarrow?
I played 2 songs that night. And it was great, man. It was great after all those years to see the guys and just kind of, you know, just kind of put it all behind us and be old men up on the stage and try to rock. You know, it was good.
Was awesome. It was the best possible way that we could have, you know, wrapped up a really amazing 13-year career as a band.
You know, every song as it goes by, you're trying not to think about it, but it's like, that's the last time I'm ever going to play that song. And you're looking down the set list, and, you know, as it gets closer to the end, you're just like, oh, fuck, you know, this is really happening.
You had all the people who would always come, but you also had the old schoolers and the new schoolers who had never seen it before, and it brought everybody together. It was amazing. I mean, people came in from Germany and Australia,
and here I was, you know, playing this music, you know, creating this noise up on the stage. Like every note we play is causing commotion, and knowing that we're walking away from it. It was very emotional for me.
But I think by the time we did our last songs, I was just so happy and so amped up from the set that it was more of a happy, emotional thing to go through. I didn't really feel sad. I felt really proud and lucky that we managed to have such an awesome career and that we were able to wrap it up in such a honorable kind of way, you know, and that the fans were there to make it that way for us.
it validated a lot of the last decade. It was really cool to see that kind of outpouring for him, and the band was totally moved by it. I think. I mean, it was like exactly how you'd want to go out.
It wasn't about what kind of clothes we were wearing or how high we could jump on stage or any of that kind of stuff. It was supposed to be about the substance in the band. And I think ultimately that's where we really connected with our fans, and that's what remained a constant throughout our career.
So I think Face to Face was looked at, and rightfully so, as kind of, you know, the forefathers that kind of bridged the gap between the pop punk world and kind of what was becoming punk rock or indie rock.
We're more of like the everyman's kind of punk rock band.
Face to Face has been a huge part of my life. They're like a cornerstone of my professional career to date.
And I mean, it's my past, man. You can't get away from it. I was there for a long time. At work, we would hear the occasional, disconnected on K-Rock, and it's always nice, and it inflates your ego a little bit.
It's part of my life. I could go to my grave holding grudges or talk smack about the other guys in the band, but why?
I mean, the first time I saw them since then was down in San Diego at a Pennywise show. Face to Face was playing and Know Your Surname was playing. When I saw Scott, I'm like, hey Scott, what's up? We talked for a while, then I seen Trevor, which I hadn't seen in years. And it was like, hey, wow, this is weird. It was a full hug and it was really cool, which it closed a big door for me.
Don't get me wrong when I say all this stuff. I'm not a complainer, and I'm not crying about what I didn't get, even though it may seem like that. I'm nothing but proud of it.
I don't think I'll ever be and have an experience like that again. It was something that sometimes the planets line up and it just makes sense.
Having people write a letter to me that says things like, I was going to kill myself, but I listened to your record over and over and over again, and the message in it really got me to see the light, and you prevented me from making a gigantic mistake, and thank you so much for what your lyrics meant to me, and that kind of thing. That's what it's all about right there. I mean, it transcends any personal motives any of us may have ever had for the band in terms of fame and money or anything like that. If you're able to really reach complete strangers and speak to them on an emotional level that carries that much weight, it's a life and death decision, you can't really hope for a lot more than that, It just, what else could you want from having a band?
If you were lucky enough to have seen them or to own the records, you couldn't help but have them make an impact in your life. I mean, they were that kind of band.
I mean, all anybody ever wants to do when they start a band was to make history in some way, just to be included in the alumni, of the genre that you're in or whatever. And hopefully we managed to make a deep enough impression that people will remember our contribution.
In a flash, I'll change the universe, release a world I knew. I'm so sick and tired of watching those who say you never do. And you're right, you're right, you're right. One, two, three, four!
God, man, that was fucking torture.
Good God.
Back in 95 when this was new, I guess I didn't have a clue. Thought the world would change the right song.
I'm gonna come across really nervous. Because I always do. Even when I'm just talking to you, I'm sketchy all the time. It's like, you know, and
You gonna let me in, you prick? Fucking asshole. You can take that out there. What a dickhead. Sorry.
This is it's a Japanese tea with Japanese vodka in it. It's called Ichiko. I figured I might just loosen myself up for this thing.
I just want to loosen up a little bit. I'm not an alcoholic, swear to God. Only on tour for some reason.
I don't know how much of this I should talk about.
Ooh.
Hold on, that dog's wearing a t-shirt. It's pretty awesome. Sorry. I can't help it. Yeah.
We can. This is the trade expo area. There's gonna be a lot of people, noisy. We can kind of walk through and talk. That's just the lunch.
Okay.
Deal.
All right. Computer. Computer.
Just edge me all the way out to the sidewalk, moron. Do you believe this shit? That guy almost pushed me up onto the curb. What a jerk. I can't do this.